You know that minor character from the game that briefly shows up to help Joel and Ellie? How about we make the most emotionally riveting and heart-wrenching story about that man's relationship with Frank? That sounds like a good idea to say the least. Episode 3 of The Last of Us I think will be the most polarizing for fans of the game because it almost entirely deviates from it. The primary aspect that is retained is the general plot point of Joel getting a car from Bill. Everything else is essentially different, and to compare and contrast the two would be a fool's errand, and if anything, they are so completely different that it would be basically spoiling the game for its rendition of events. Craig and Neil decide here to opt for a more lighthearted and happy exploration of a relationship set within a depressing post-apocalyptic world. That kind of direction in of itself is beautiful because so rarely are there happy endings in this type of setting. Not to mention that we kind of needed this for how much darker the show will inevitably get. So personally, I think this deviation from the source material is outstanding and achieves such a high quality in storytelling that it's baffling how well the creators are pulling it off. Because generally, when you start to deviate too far from the source material, issues arise. However, for The Last of Us, it's the opposite. Every form of deviation is used to expand the world and further dive into characters that the game wasn't able to put a spotlight on. Bill in the game was definitely an interesting character, but here in the show, he's brought to life and we get to witness all of his best moments. This episode as a whole reminds me of the first 10 minutes of Up. It's a story of two lovers that is told over the years as they get older and one of them succumbs to sickness. They both explore the happiness and beauty of life, and it's also a reminder of the sadness that comes with death and sickness. They obviously have different endings since Carl doesn't kill himself in Up, but I think they both achieve such a magnificent execution that is imbued with so much love to the point that anyone who watches those works will cry or come close to it. The Last of Us Episode 3 is practically flawless and has no down moment through the entirety of its runtime. If anything, I wish the episode was much longer, even though it was already over an hour long. Like, I would have gladly watched Ron Swanson the Survivalist build up his defenses in a zombie apocalypse as a miniseries in of itself. But the montage we do get from that sequence is perfect and gives you just enough in a short amount of time to fully educate us as to his whole situation. That, and it was just very intriguing to see this kind of situation play out, and the practicality and realism of this type of scenario. Thinking about this episode, there's only one nitpick that I could think of, and that was Bill standing out in the middle of the street shooting raiders as he was getting shot at. It seemed pretty dumb that he didn't have a pre-designated area that he could shoot from that at least had more cover, because his method here is obviously unsafe, especially since Joel warned him about a raider attack the scene prior. This again is the only small flaw in the episode for me, and I think it was just a way for the writers to injure Bill and to have Frank save his life. And I think everything is made up for by how brilliant the ending of the scene was. Doing a time jump and showing a wide shot of a character in a wheelchair makes the audience automatically assume that that character is Bill. So it's a twist just through the editing and presentation of the story that it was actually Frank. But before going into their heartfelt ending, let's fully analyze the entire story of Bill and Frank and the scenes leading up to this to see why this is HBO's Magnum Opus. The episode does start out with Joel and Ellie, and for all the people that said there wasn't enough of them here, I think we get a pretty good amount from how long the episode was. Like, off of runtime alone, Joel and Ellie are still in about 27 minutes of the episode. Their first few scenes are definitely great, and it exemplifies Joel's refusal to bond with Ellie, given that Ellie's smuggling mission is the reason for Tess's death. Joel is in mourning as he goes on autopilot to carry out this objective, and most attempts Ellie makes to talk to Joel are shut down. In a way, he blames her, and him shutting her out is a part of his frustration. Then, slowly through the course of their scenes, Ellie is able to pierce through Joel's thick exterior and finally gets him to start talking. Ellie does this by asking a string of questions that Joel can't really ignore, and at a baseline, Ellie is able to make Joel partially open up to her. Then the moment where Joel even makes a quick-handed joke towards Ellie confirms that this process is working.
Is there anything bad in here?
Just you.
Ah, getting funnier.
From here, the questions she asks become more and more personal and require elaboration. From those questions, my two favorite were Ellie asking what it was like to fly in a plane, and her asking about the origin of the outbreak. The education that Joel provides is really insightful and acts as both an interesting moment for the audience because it gives us some backstory, and marks the point where Joel has moved past his anger towards Ellie. Joel is now the one who's doing most of the talking and is probably relating back to the feeling of being a father where you inform your children. Through these 15 minutes, we see their relationship subtly change. As Joel starts to open up, and even through Pedro's performance, you can see him admire Ellie from time to time. This kind of nuance and progression for Joel and Ellie isn't really in the game, and the show offers a more realistic approach for what Joel would be feeling in these scenes. Because in the game, they move on pretty quickly after Tess dies, and Joel and Ellie are always on pretty good terms. Like this moment where Joel sets his ground rules for Ellie at the end of the episode happens right after Tess's death in the game. There isn't a long period for Joel to process what happened to Tess, because each main event for the game is generally surrounded by action or things to engage the player gameplay-wise. So in contrast, this episode offers a progression for them that is fulfilled by the end of the episode when Joel listens to the music that Ellie puts on. At first, Joel is reluctant to show any form of happiness, but he gives in and allows himself to fully bond with Ellie. Just within this under half-hour stretch of time, it achieves some great character development, their relationship is more detailed and realistic, and each scene had an additional aspect that strengthened it, like the suspenseful moment in the basement, the intriguing backstories like the people getting executed, and the suicide note that sends our characters through a roller coaster of emotions. So anyone who is dissatisfied with the fact that there wasn't enough progression within this episode and it didn't entirely feature Joel and Ellie confuses me.
Well, don't you look pretty?
Shut up.
Because not only does Bill and Frank's story hit so fucking hard, but it also is relevant within the plot given that Joel and Ellie react to their demise and also need their truck, along with scenes that fleshed out Joel and Tess's past with Bill and Frank. Even though this episode is mostly comprised of a self-contained story, the writers are still able to make it relevant, and they managed to tell one of the best one-off stories I've seen for a while. And let's finally get into Bill and Frank's story. I don't think I'd be exaggerating when I say that this is one of the best stories in a post-apocalyptic setting that has ever been told. The journey we go on with Bill and Frank is constantly riveting with so many deeply moving scenes and so many beautiful little moments that makes the story feel like a gem in the rough. For this whole section of the episode, I first want to mention the acting. Nick Offerman and Murray Bartlett give incredible performances, and I'll be surprised if one of them don't receive a guest starring Emmy nomination for acting. Their entire relationship and evolution is insanely touching, and I'll probably keep thinking about them for a while. Both of their performances throughout some of their first encounters are so layered and are entrenched with so many details to pick up on. You can see Bill struggle to contain his happiness as he tries to put on an unmoved expression. He does this to not allude to the fact that he's liking the presence of Frank, because if he communicates that, then Frank can take that as a signal to stay. Along with Bill getting a little flustered at times that Frank also picks up on. Their performances are subtle enough to understand what they are going through precisely in each moment, to the point that it doesn't feel jarring when it's revealed that Bill is gay. That, in this moment, gives Nick Offerman playing the piano and singing in such a whimsical little moment that even feels like an escape from our own lives, which is ironic considering that the world they live in is over. Like, I was genuinely taken aback for a second during this wonder-like moment. The whole nature of this scene, where a kind man decides to give a man on the verge of death a chance, a meal, a shower, and a good time, is extremely wholesome, and it reveals the true nature of Frank. He's not a crazy person, and Bill's kindness is paid off. Despite Bill at first being hesitant and wanting to play it safe by sending Frank away, but I think he quickly realizes the opportunity to form a connection with another human being that he's probably been missing for a while. And at best, it can turn into a romantic relationship. It's just a joyful experience to witness this because of how rare this scenario must be in this bleak and depressing world. Even though this is a post-apocalyptic story, I love how this episode focuses on some of the small joys of life. Even through Joel and Ellie's brief scenes, they essentially carry this notion, like through Ellie finding an old arcade game she loved, and them finding the music in the car. The moment for Bill and Frank that was very precious was them eating strawberries for the first time in years. This moment was so happy and beautiful that it almost feels surreal in a way. I think the cinematography here aids that feeling with how they time the sun to peer through the trees in the background. On one side of the frame, you have the sun gushing in with a warm lens flare, while on the other, we have Bill and Frank giving each other a loving embrace, which this single shot on its own must have been frustrating because they probably had a very limited time to get it. The lengths that the creators are going to make this as visually delightful as possible is great, and it really comes together to create an unbeatable aura of happiness. However, we can't just have an episode without any conflict. All these bejeweling moments are then contrasted by the Raider attack, and Frank getting an uncurable, life-threatening illness. This is where the episode really feels like up to me, and is a further exploration of that kind of story concept. Here in The Last of Us, our characters are more accepting of death because they lived an extremely fulfilling life, especially given the fact that the world has ended. So seeing them this happy and living one more final day of what they perceive as their perfect life was thoroughly heartwarming. Literally every moment within the last 10 minutes of their relationship is the most I've felt in ages. I haven't been this impacted by an episode, and every aspect of production here, as always, is unmatched. Especially the performances again. Seeing Nick Offerman break down really destroyed me because this man kind of exemplifies the manly trope of men who hide their emotions. But here, he's sobbing and realizes that the love of his life is going to be dead at the end of the day. Nick Offerman can convey so much emotion, and he's a man of few words. Like, it's truly impressive how much this man can say through his face alone. I am gushing quite a bit about Nick Offerman's performance here, but I think it's matched by Murray Bartlett. His happy and somewhat calm demeanor from him accepting death offers a great contrast to the sadness that Nick is exuding. Murray's performance was so good, in fact, that I didn't even notice that he was the same person who played Armand in season 1 of The White Lotus. He was just so captivating and alluring that he became the character, and I never pictured him as anyone else. This overall topic of a loved one passing away and having to accept their wishes is such a tragic element to explore, and I think it was perfectly done. It's sad, but it's simultaneously portraying a feels-good moment as these two lovers live out the last day of their lives together. All of this being swept away by violins and no dialogue further enhances the already gargantuan feelings that this scene is extracting from me, and it all comes together to make something amazing. Then their final meal was perfectly paced as they take the time to process what's happening. Shots of them staring at each other lovingly for one last time is enough to get me swelling up again. At this point, the episode has you firmly locked in with these characters, so when it's revealed that Bill also put pills in the bottle and was going to die, it further raised the scene that was already in the stratosphere. Frank isn't even furious at him, and realizes that it would be hypocritical to be mad at Bill, and equally accepts Bill's wishes that he wants to die with Frank. Like, I don't know how the hell Neil and Craig were able to keep one-upping themselves here, because holy shit, was this a magnificent ride. And for most of the time after this scene, I thought Bill would have a botched suicide or something, since he appears in the game, but Neil and Craig commit to the bit at an aspiring level to not bringing him back. Then it's capped off with a suicide note and even leads into Joel confronting the loss of Tess. It's staggering how great this deviation from the source material is, and if it's going to be this good, then be my guest, change as much as you want. I know some people will be mad at them for changing this much already, but keep in mind the core plot is still the same. It's just the means in which we got here were a tad bit different. One had more action while the other decided to pop off with one of the best recent love stories. Even though this focuses on two minor characters from the game, it still tells a gripping story within this world that is good enough to take most of the spotlight. On IMDb, this episode is already falling in terms of its rating. It is at an 8.3 currently as of writing this video, which is really surprising to me. I don't know if people are either mad at the mass deviation, or if people were bored or something. Because if this wasn't able to capture you and resonate with you, then I don't know what will. I think this drama is making a great substitution for all the action in the game because there's already a lot of action there and you can't just throw all that into the show. The main complaint I did see is that Joel and Ellie aren't the same or aren't being featured enough, but I'd argue the show goes in more depth than the game. Because the show is able to focus on the acting more, while the game's story is primarily told through dialogue when you're navigating through the world. Things I pointed out earlier, like Joel dealing with the loss of Tess, is explored way more here than the game as a comparison. That and Joel and Ellie were still in almost 27 minutes of the last episode, and they had their own mini arc of sorts. So yeah, to me this is essentially HBO's Magnum Opus in recent memory, and rivals some of their best episodes in the past. I won't say it's the flat out best, like better than The Red Wedding or some of the peak episodes of Game of Thrones, but it's definitely up towards the top and you can't beat that final shot of the episode. Thank you for watching and let me know what you guys thought about episode 3 of The Last of Us.